The October sun blazed mercilessly over the dusty town of Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory. In 1883, the wooden platform that served as the town's courthouse steps had been transformed into a place of public punishment, where justice was dispensed, with the crack of a whip and the jeers of an assembled crowd. What was about to unfold would become the defining moment in the life of one man and change the very soul of a frontier community. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales from the Old West that will move your heart and inspire your spirit. 12-year-old Timothy O'Brien knelt on the platform, his small hands bound behind his back with coarse rope that had already begun to chafe his thin wrists. His face, smudged with dirt and streaked with tears, showed the terror of a child who understood that adult justice was about to fall upon his narrow shoulders. The boy's crime, stealing a loaf of bread from Muller's General Store to feed his dying mother. Judge Cornelius Blackwood, a stern man in his 60s who had brought Eastern notions of law and order to the frontier, stood before the crowd with a leather-bound book in his hands. His voice carried across the dusty square with the authority of a man who had never known hunger or desperation. "Timothy O'Brien," the judge intoned, "you have been found guilty of theft. The sentence is 20 lashes, to be administered immediately, as a lesson to other would-be thieves in this community." A crowd of nearly 200 people pressed closer to the platform, their faces showing a mixture of anticipation and discomfort. Some had come for the spectacle, others from a sense of civic duty, but many were beginning to question whether a child should suffer such punishment for trying to feed his starving mother. Among the crowd stood Marcus Cole, a man whose very presence seemed to command respect without demanding it. At 42, Cole was a former cavalry officer who had come to Redemption Creek 6 months earlier, seeking nothing more than a quiet place to forget the horrors he had witnessed during the Indian Wars. His weathered face bore the scars of countless battles, but his eyes held a gentleness that spoke of a soul that had not been completely hardened by violence. Cole had been in Muller's store when young Timothy had attempted to steal the bread. He had watched as the boy's trembling hands had reached for the loaf, driven by desperation rather than criminal intent. Cole had even started to reach for his own money to pay for the bread, but store owner Heinrich Mueller had spotted the boy first and raised the alarm. Sheriff Walter Grimm, a heavy-set man who took perverse pleasure in his role as the town's enforcer, stepped forward with a bullwhip coiled in his hands. The leather weapon was 8 feet long and had been used to break horses and, on occasions like this, to break the spirits of those who dared to defy the town's version of justice. "Boy," Grimm said, his voice carrying across the square, "you brought this on yourself. Maybe next time you'll think twice before taking what don't belong to you." Timothy's voice was barely a whisper, but in the relative quiet of the crowd, his words carried clearly. "I just wanted to help my mama. She ain't eaten in 3 days." The crowd stirred uneasily. Many of them knew about the O'Brien family's situation. Patrick O'Brien had died in a mining accident 4 months earlier, leaving his wife Mary to care for their son while battling consumption. The woman was clearly dying, and the boy had been working odd jobs around town, trying to earn enough money to buy food and medicine. Judge Blackwood raised his hand for silence. "The circumstances of your crime do not excuse it, boy. The law must be applied equally to all, regardless of age or situation. Sheriff Grimm, proceed with the sentence." It was at that moment that Marcus Cole stepped forward, his boots striking the wooden platform with the measured pace of a man who had made an irrevocable decision. The crowd parted before him like water before the bow of a ship, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "Your Honor," Cole said, his voice calm but carrying the authority of a man accustomed to command, "I request permission to speak on behalf of the boy." Judge Blackwood frowned, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Mr. Cole, The time for testimony has passed. The sentence has been pronounced and will be carried out. I'm not here to contest the verdict, Cole replied, moving to stand beside Timothy. I'm here to invoke an old territorial law that allows a man to take upon himself the punishment meant for another, provided certain conditions are met. The crowd fell silent. Even Sheriff Grimm lowered his whip, uncertain how to proceed. Judge Blackwood's frown deepened as he considered Cole's words. What conditions? The judge asked reluctantly. The substitute must be a man of good standing. In the community, he must willingly accept the full punishment, and he must have the consent of the person originally sentenced. Cole looked down at Timothy, whose tear-filled eyes showed confusion and hope in equal measure. Timothy, do you give your consent for me to take your punishment? The boy nodded frantically. Unable to speak through his tears, Judge Blackwood consulted his law book, clearly hoping to find a reason to deny the request. After several long minutes, he looked up with obvious reluctance. The law does exist, though it has not been invoked in this territory for over a decade. However, Mr. Cole, I must warn you that the sentence remains 20 lashes. Are you prepared to accept this punishment? Cole began removing his shirt, revealing a torso crisscrossed with old scars from battles and conflicts that had marked his military career. I am, Your Honor. Don't miss what happens next in this incredible act of sacrifice. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to see how one man's courage changes everything. As Cole knelt in the position that Timothy had occupied just moments before, the crowd began to murmur. Some were moved by his sacrifice. Others questioned his sanity, but all recognized that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the town's physician and one of the few women present, stepped forward. Judge Blackwood, I protest this entire proceeding. A man should not be punished for an act of mercy, and a child should not have been sentenced to such harsh punishment in the first place. Dr. Mitchell, the judge replied coldly, you are here as a medical observer only. The law does not recognize your protests. Sheriff Grimm approached Cole with obvious reluctance. Unlike the judge, Grimm had served in the military and recognized Cole as a fellow veteran. He knew that Cole had been decorated for valor during the Indian Wars and that he was not a man to be trifled with. Mr. Cole, Grimm said quietly, you sure about this? 20 lashes ain't nothing to joke about. Cole looked back at Timothy, who was now being untied by Deputy Harrison. The boy's face showed a mixture of relief and anguish, grateful to be spared, but horrified that someone else was taking his place. I'm sure, Sheriff, Cole replied. Let's get this over with. The first lash fell with a sound like thunder, the leather whip striking Cole's back with enough force to split the skin. Cole gritted his teeth, but made no sound, determined to show no weakness before the crowd. The second lash followed quickly, then the third, each one opening new wounds across his shoulders, and by the 10th lash, Cole's back was a mass of blood and torn flesh, but he remained upright, his hands clenched into fists, but his voice silent. The crowd, initially eager for the spectacle, had grown increasingly uncomfortable. Many turned away, unable to watch the punishment of a man who had committed no crime other than showing mercy to a child. Timothy had pushed through the crowd and now stood at the edge of the platform, tears streaming down his face. Stop, he cried out. Please stop. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I stole the bread. But the law was implacable. Judge Blackwood stood with his arms crossed, watching the punishment with the detached interest of a man who had never felt the bite of a whip on his own flesh. Sheriff Grimm continued to deliver the lashes, though his strikes were becoming notably less forceful as the count climbed toward 20. The crowd's murmur grew louder, and several men began to move toward the platform. Judge Blackwood, sensing that the situation was spiraling beyond his control, made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Continue with the punishment," he ordered Sheriff Grimm. "All 20 lashes as prescribed by law." The final lash fell with a sound that seemed to echo through the souls of everyone present. Cole collapsed onto the platform, his back a ruin of blood and torn flesh, but he was conscious and alive. He had taken the full punishment meant for a 12-year-old boy, and in doing so, he had shown the town what true courage looked like. Timothy immediately ran to Cole's side, his small hands hovering over the man's wounds. Afraid to touch, but desperate to help, Dr. Mitchell pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Cole, her medical bag already open. "Get him to my clinic immediately," she ordered, "and someone send for clean water and bandages." As strong hands lifted Cole from the platform, he managed to look at Timothy and whisper, "Your mother. Make sure she gets food. Promise me." "I promise," Timothy sobbed. "I promise, Mr. Cole." The crowd dispersed slowly, many of them in stunned silence. They had come to watch a child be punished for stealing bread, but they had witnessed something far more profound. A man who had chosen to suffer for another's sake, who had shown that mercy was more powerful than law, and that true justice sometimes required someone to step forward and say, "Not on my watch." 3 days after Marcus Cole's sacrifice, the town of Redemption Creek found itself grappling with an uncomfortable truth. They had witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about justice, courage, and what it meant to be a community. The event had divided the town into 2 camps, those who saw Cole as a hero and those who viewed him as a dangerous example of lawlessness. If this story of sacrifice and redemption has captured your heart, make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more incredible tales from the frontier. In Dr. Mitchell's clinic, Cole lay face down on a narrow cot, his back wrapped in clean bandages that had to be changed twice daily. The wounds were healing, but slowly, and the doctor warned that he would carry the scars for the rest of his life. Despite his pain, Cole's first concern was for Timothy and his mother. "How is Mary O'Brien?" he asked when Dr. Mitchell came to check his wounds on the 3rd morning. "Better," the doctor replied, her voice carrying a mixture of professional concern and personal admiration. "The whole town has been bringing food to their cabin. It seems your sacrifice has awakened something in people's hearts." Indeed, the aftermath of Cole's punishment had been extraordinary. Within hours of the whipping, a steady stream of townspeople had begun appearing at the O'Brien cabin. Mrs. Patterson from the bakery brought fresh bread and soup. Tom Bradley, the blacksmith, brought vegetables from his garden. Even Heinrich Mueller, the store owner whose complaint had started the whole affair, had arrived with a basket of supplies and a gruff apology. "I never meant for it to go this far," Mueller had told young Timothy. "I just wanted to teach you that stealing was wrong. But what Mr. Cole did, that's the kind of man I should have been." The transformation wasn't limited to charity for the O'Brien family. Throughout the town, people were beginning to question the harsh justice that had been dispensed in their name. Martha Stevens, the schoolteacher, had organized a meeting to discuss forming a committee to help struggling families before they reached the point of desperation. "We can't prevent every tragedy," she had said to the gathered women, "but we can certainly try to prevent a child from having to steal bread to feed his dying mother." However, not everyone was pleased with the changes that Cole's sacrifice had inspired. Judge Blackwood, in particular, was furious about what he saw as a challenge to his authority and the rule of law. "That man has made a mockery of my court," he complained to Sheriff Grimm. "By taking the boy's punishment, he's encouraged others to think they can simply ignore the consequences of their actions." Sheriff Grimm, however, had been deeply affected by what he had witnessed. The veteran lawman had seen many punishments in his career, but something about whipping a man who had committed no crime other than showing mercy, had shaken him to his core. "Judge," Grimm said carefully, "maybe we need to think about whether 20 lashes for a loaf of bread is the right kind of justice for our town." Blackwood's face flushed red. "The law is the law, Sheriff. If we start making exceptions based on sentiment, we'll have chaos in the streets." But the judge's words rang hollow in the face of what the town had witnessed. Far from encouraging lawlessness, Cole's sacrifice had inspired a wave of community spirit and mutual aid that was making crime less likely. Not more. Meanwhile, in the clinic, Cole was receiving visitors despite Dr. Mitchell's protests about his need for rest. Timothy came every day, reading to him from books borrowed from the schoolhouse, and updating him on his mother's improving condition. "She's getting stronger every day," Timothy reported on the 4th day. "And she wants to thank you proper when you're healed up." "You don't need to thank me," Cole replied, wincing as he shifted position. "Just promise me you'll never steal again, no matter how desperate things get." "I promise," Timothy said solemnly. "But Mr. Cole, why did you do it? Why did you take my punishment?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling as he considered his answer. "Because sometimes, son, a man has to do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Father Santos had also become a regular visitor, bringing not just spiritual comfort, but also news from around the town. The priest had been deeply moved by Cole's sacrifice, and saw in it a reflection of the kind of selfless love that formed the foundation of his faith. "Your actions have changed something in this community," the priest told Cole during one of his visits. "People are talking about mercy and justice in ways they never have before. You've given them an example of what it means to love your neighbor as yourself." Cole shook his head. "I'm no saint, Father. I just couldn't stand by and watch a child suffer for trying to feed his mother." "That's exactly what makes you a saint in my eyes," Father Santos replied. "Saints aren't perfect people. They're people who choose to do the right thing when it matters most." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor, Judge Blackwood himself. The judge entered the clinic with the stiff formality that characterized all his interactions, his face set in stern lines that revealed nothing of his inner thoughts. "Mr. Cole," the judge said, "I've come to discuss your actions and their consequences for this community." Dr. Mitchell immediately stepped forward. "Judge Blackwood, my patient needs rest. This is hardly the time for official business." "The doctor is right," Cole said, struggling to sit up despite the pain. "But I'll hear what the judge has to say." Blackwood moved closer to the bed, his voice low and intense. "Your little display of heroism has undermined the very foundations of law and order in this town. People are questioning my authority, challenging my decisions, and worst of all, they're beginning to think that the law is something they can simply ignore when it doesn't suit them." Cole met the judge's gaze steadily. "With respect, Your Honor, I didn't ignore the law. I used it. That territorial statute you cited is still law, isn't it?" "A technicality," Blackwood snapped. "An archaic provision that was never meant to be. Used in situations like this." "Maybe," Cole replied, "but it exists for a reason. Sometimes justice requires mercy, and sometimes the law needs to be tempered with compassion." The judge's voice rose slightly. "Compassion? You call encouraging lawlessness compassion? That boy committed a crime, and you've taught him that there are no consequences for his actions. I've taught him that there are people in this world who will stand up for him when he can't stand up for himself," Cole countered. "And I've taught this town that sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do." The tension is building as the town grapples with the meaning of justice. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to see how this confrontation changes. "Everything?" Father Santos, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke up. Judge Blackwood, with respect, I think Mr. Cole has shown us what true justice looks like. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about healing, redemption, and protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Stay out of this, Father, Blackwood warned. This is a matter of law, not theology. But they're connected, the priest insisted. The law serves the people, not the other way around. And if the law demands that a child be flogged for trying to feed his dying mother, then perhaps the law needs to be examined. The argument was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Grimm, who entered the clinic with obvious reluctance. Judge, I hate to interrupt, but we've got a situation developing outside. Through the window, they could see a crowd gathering in the street outside the clinic. Word had spread that Judge Blackwood was confronting Cole, and the townspeople had come to show their support for the man who had taken 20 lashes for a child. What do they want? Blackwood asked, his voice betraying his nervousness. They want to thank Mr. Cole, Grimm replied, and they want to talk about how we handle justice in this town going forward. The judge's face went pale. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Mob rule replacing law and order. But Cole shook his head. That's not a mob, Judge. That's a community. And they're not here to overthrow the law. They're here because they've seen what the law can become when it's applied with compassion instead of just severity. Dr. Mitchell moved to the window and looked out at the crowd. There must be 50 people out there, she reported. Men, women, children. They're not angry. They single quotes hopeful. Indeed, the crowd outside bore little resemblance to an angry mob. People were talking quietly among themselves, many holding flowers or small gifts for Cole. Children played at the edges of the group, while their parents discussed what they had witnessed and what it meant for their community. Timothy O'Brien was among the crowd, standing with his mother, who had insisted on coming despite her weakness. Mary O'Brien, though still pale and thin, looked stronger than she had in months, supported by the knowledge that her community had rallied around her family in their time of need. Perhaps, Father Santos suggested quietly, it's time for all of us to go outside and listen to what the people have to say. Judge Blackwood hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of facing the crowd. But he was also aware that his authority ultimately depended on the consent of the governed, and that consent was clearly in question. Very well, he said finally. But I want it understood that the law will be respected, regardless of popular opinion. As the group prepared to leave the clinic, Cole struggled to his feet despite Dr. Mitchell's protests. If we're going to talk about justice and mercy, he said, then I want to be part of that conversation. The crowd outside fell silent as the clinic door opened and Cole emerged, supported by Father Santos and Sheriff Grimm. The sight of the man who had taken 20 lashes for a child brought tears to many eyes and a spontaneous round of applause that seemed to echo off the buildings. Surrounding them, Martha Stevens, the schoolteacher, stepped forward to speak for the crowd. Mr. Cole, we wanted to thank you for what you did. But more than that, we wanted to talk about how we can build a community where such sacrifices aren't necessary. Cole nodded, his voice carrying clearly despite his weakness. What happened to me isn't important. What's important is what we do going forward. How we treat each other, how we care for our neighbors, how we make sure that no child ever has to steal bread to feed his family. Judge Blackwood, realizing that the crowd was not hostile, but genuinely interested in dialogue, stepped forward. The law exists to protect all of us, he said, but perhaps it's time to consider whether our application of the law serves the best interests of this community. It was a small concession, but it was enough to begin a conversation that would transform Redemption Creek from a place where justice was dispensed with a whip to a community where mercy and law worked together. To protect the vulnerable and uplift the fallen dot as the sun set over the town. The crowd began to disperse, but not before many of them had approached Cole personally to thank him and to promise that they would do their part to build a more compassionate community. The man who had taken 20 lashes for a child had started something that would ripple through Redemption Creek for generations to come. The question now was whether that ripple would become a wave of positive change or whether the old ways would reassert themselves. 6 months after Marcus Cole's sacrifice, Redemption Creek had transformed into a community that bore little resemblance to the harsh frontier town where a child had once been sentenced to 20 lashes for stealing bread. The changes were visible everywhere. In the new community fund that helped struggling families, in the modified legal procedures that emphasized rehabilitation over punishment, and most importantly, in the way people treated each other with a kindness that had been awakened by one man's willingness to suffer for another. Join us for the incredible conclusion of this story. It proves how one act of courage can change an entire community. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales from the Old West. Cole had healed from his physical wounds, though the scars across his back served as a permanent reminder of that October day. More significantly, he had found a purpose in redemption Creek that had eluded him since leaving the military. The town had unanimously elected him as their marshal, a position he had accepted with the understanding that law enforcement would be guided by principles of mercy and justice working in harmony. Order in the court called out the familiar voice, but it wasn't Judge Blackwood presiding over the proceedings. The harsh judge had resigned his position 3 months earlier, citing philosophical differences with the community's new approach to justice. In his place sat Judge Rebecca Hayes, a woman who had arrived from Denver with a reputation for fairness and a belief that the law should serve the people, not the other way around. The case before the court was similar to the one that had changed everything. A young man named Carlos Mendez had been caught stealing supplies from the general store, but the response was entirely different. "Mr. Mendez," Judge Hayes said gently, "tell the court why you took these items." Carlos, a 17-year-old whose family had recently arrived from Mexico, stood nervously before the bench. "My little sister is sick, Your Honor. We don't have money for medicine, and I thought maybe I could trade work for what we needed, but Mr. Mueller said no." Heinrich Mueller, the store owner, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The same man who had once demanded harsh punishment for Timothy O'Brien now spoke with a different voice. "Your Honor," Mueller said, standing, "I'd like to withdraw my complaint. I was wrong to refuse the boy's offer to work. I have plenty of tasks that need doing, and his family's needs are more important than my pride." Judge Hayes nodded approvingly. "Mr. Mueller, would you be willing to work out an arrangement with Mr. Mendez that would allow him to earn what his family needs?" "I'd be honored to, Your Honor." Marshal Cole, who had been observing from the back of the courtroom, smiled at the transformation. This was what justice looked like when it was tempered with mercy and guided by community values rather than rigid adherence to punishment. After the hearing, Cole walked through the town square, noting the changes that had taken place. Where once there had been a whipping post, now stood a small garden tended by the women of the community. The sheriff's office had been expanded to include a room where struggling families could receive assistance and counseling. Most remarkably, the town had established a school for both English and Spanish-speaking children, taught by Martha Stevens and a new teacher recruited from Santa Fe. Timothy O'Brien, now 13 and healthy, ran up to Cole with the enthusiasm of a boy who had been given a second chance at life. "Marshal Cole! Marshal Cole! Did you hear? My ma's going to marry Dr. Mitchell." Cole's face broke into a genuine smile. Mary O'Brien's recovery had been one of the most remarkable transformations in the town. With proper medical care and adequate nutrition, she had regained her health and had fallen in love with the doctor who had saved both her and her son's benefactor. "That's wonderful news, Timothy. Dr. Mitchell is a good woman, and your mother deserves all the happiness in the world. She says it's all because of what you did, Timothy said, his voice suddenly serious. She says you saved our whole family. Cole knelt down to the boy's level. I didn't save anyone, son. The community saved itself. All I did was remind people that sometimes we have to be willing to sacrifice for others. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Father Santos, who had become not just Cole's spiritual advisor, but his closest friend. Marcus, I have news from the territorial capital. The governor wants to meet with you. Cole raised an eyebrow. About what? About your methods here in Redemption Creek. Word has spread about what you've accomplished, and other communities are asking for guidance on how to implement similar approaches to law enforcement. Indeed, the transformation of Redemption Creek had attracted attention throughout the Arizona Territory. Newspaper articles had been written about the town where a man had taken 20 lashes for a child, and how that sacrifice had inspired a complete reimagining of frontier justice. Visitors came regularly to observe the town's new approaches to law enforcement, community support, and conflict resolution. Many left with plans to implement similar programs in their own communities, creating a ripple effect that spread far beyond the borders of Redemption Creek. The impact of one man's sacrifice continues to spread across the frontier. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to see how this story inspires change far beyond one small town. One such visitor was Captain James Harrison, Cole's former commanding officer from the cavalry. Harrison had ridden into town that morning, curious to see what had become of one of his best officers. Cole, Harrison said, as they sat on the porch of the marshal's office, I have to admit, when I heard what you'd done, I thought you'd lost your mind. Taking a whipping for some kid you barely knew? But seeing what it's led to? He gestured toward the bustling, harmonious town around them. I'm starting to think you might be the sanest man I've ever known. Cole sipped his coffee thoughtfully. I just did what felt right at the time. I never expected it to change anything beyond helping one boy. But that's exactly why it worked, Harrison replied. You weren't trying to make a statement or prove a point. You were just doing what your conscience told you was right. And that authenticity is what inspired everyone else. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar but unexpected figure, former Judge Blackwood, who had returned to Redemption Creek for the first time since his resignation. The man who had once embodied harsh frontier justice looked older, more uncertain, but also somehow more human. Mr. Cole, Blackwood said, approaching hesitantly, I was wondering if we might have a word. Cole stood and extended his hand. Of course, Judge. Please, sit down. Blackwood settled into a chair, his hands trembling slightly. I've been thinking about what happened here, about what you did and what it led to. I came back because I wanted to apologize. For what? For being so rigid, so unwilling to consider that there might be a better way. I was so focused on maintaining order that I forgot justice is supposed to serve people, not the other way around. Cole nodded thoughtfully. We all do what we think is right at the time. The important thing is that we're willing to learn and change when we discover a better way. I've been watching other communities try to implement what you've done here, Blackwood continued. Some are succeeding, others are struggling. They're missing something, and I think I know what it is. What's that? They're trying to copy your methods without understanding your heart. They see the community programs, the emphasis on rehabilitation, the collaborative approach to justice, but they don't understand that it all flows from a willingness to sacrifice for others. Cole considered this. Maybe that's the point. Maybe real change can only happen when people are willing to put others' needs before their own. As the afternoon wore on, more townspeople gathered on the porch, drawn by the unusual sight of the May. Former judge in conversation with the marshal. The discussion that followed was remarkable for its civility and depth, with people sharing their experiences of the town's transformation and their hopes for its future. Mary O'Brien, now Mrs. Mitchell, arrived with her new husband and Timothy. She had asked to speak to Cole privately, and the two stepped aside from the group. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I wanted to tell you that Sarah and I are expecting a child." Cole's face lit up with joy. "That's wonderful news, Mary. You deserve all the happiness in the world." "We want to name the baby Marcus if it's a boy," she continued. "We want our child to carry the name of the man who saved our family." Cole felt tears welling in his eyes. "I'd be honored, Mary, but remember, it was the community that saved your family. I just helped get the ball rolling." As the sun began to set over Redemption Creek, the townspeople gradually dispersed to their homes. But the sense of community and shared purpose that had been kindled by Cole's sacrifice remained strong. The town had not just survived the transformation, from harsh frontier justice to compassionate community. It had thrived. Judge Hayes approached Cole as he prepared to lock up the marshal's office. "Marcus, I wanted to thank you for what you've built here. This community is a model for what the frontier can become when people choose cooperation over conflict." "I didn't build anything," Cole replied. "I just reminded people of what they already knew in their hearts, that we're all in this together." That evening, Cole sat on his porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear Arizona sky. 6 months ago, he had been a broken man seeking nothing more than a quiet place to fade away. Now he was a leader, a symbol of hope, and most importantly, a vital part of a community that had learned to care for its own. Timothy O'Brien appeared at his gate, as he did most evenings, carrying a book and ready to read aloud to the man who had changed his life. But tonight, Timothy had a different purpose. "Marshal Cole," the boy said, "I've been thinking about what you did for me, and I want to do something for someone else. There's a new family in town, and they're struggling, just like we were. I want to help them." Cole smiled, realizing that the true legacy of his sacrifice was not the changes in laws or procedures, but the transformation of hearts and minds that would continue long after he was gone. "That's a fine idea, Timothy. How can I help?" "I thought maybe we could organize the whole town to help, like they did for us. Make sure no family has to go through what we went through." As they began to plan their community outreach, Cole reflected on the strange path that had led him from a man taking 20 lashes for a child to a leader helping to build a more compassionate society. He had found his purpose not in seeking glory or recognition, but in being willing to sacrifice for others. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of sacrifice, redemption, and community transformation. Marcus Cole's willingness to take 20 lashes for a child he barely knew sparked a revolution of kindness that changed not just one town, but inspired communities across the frontier. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this tale with others who need to hear that one person's courage can change the world. Let us know in the comments what aspect of this story inspired you most. The man who had taken the lashes meant for a boy had discovered that true heroism lies not in grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices, but in the daily choice to put others' needs before your own. His legacy would live on in every act of kindness, every moment of mercy, and every time someone chose to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. In the end, Marcus Cole had found what he had been searching for since leaving the military, a way to serve that brought healing rather than harm, a community where justice and mercy walked hand in hand, and a purpose that would outlast any individual. Life. The scars on his back would always remind him of that October day when he chose to take a child's punishment, but they had become symbols not of suffering, but of the transformative power of sacrificial love. And in the thriving community of Redemption Creek, and love continued to work its quiet miracles, one heart at a time.